everyone. Lovely to see you all. Apologies for being late, but obviously the plenary session was running a bit later than anticipated. But I'm extremely happy now to say that we can start our white elephant arrival in the room, and very excited to be able to be part of this session. The white elephant in the room is a really good topic because, you know, the tension between technology and education and the trends evolving in technology and the questions that are arising from that and how education has got its own kind of tensions to deal with comes up with quite a lot of questions. We've heard what Andrea Schleicher had to say earlier. So without much further ado, I would like to open the session and let colleagues here start. Okay. I've got some wonderful speakers sitting here next to me. I will let them introduce themselves, and they will then tell you their story. And afterwards, we're hoping to have a very vibrant Q&A where we can kind of engage with you in some interesting and challenging topics. So, thank you very much. Do you want to start?
I can start.
Yeah.
Should I start from the side? Can you hear me? It's on. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rania Hadi, and I look after Google's education business in the Middle East and North Africa. I've been with Google for about 13 years now, but more recently focusing on education and bringing our technology and solution to classrooms across the region. And very pleased to be here with you today.
I'm Justine Cassell. I'm Associate Dean for Technology, Strategy, and Impact at Carnegie Mellon University. My background is actually in developmental psychology and linguistics, and I fell backwards into computer science after my PhD. And I'm curating the Future Zone, which I hope all of you will go visit many times today and tomorrow.
Suleyman Kashani, I'm Vice Provost for Teaching and Learning at Columbia University, where I'm also Senior Vice Dean of the School of Engineering and Applied Science and a Professor of Industrial Engineering Operations Research. And I'm really happy to be here today.
My name is Koen. I'm a Belgian educator, and I've been teaching for 17 years computer science and more specifically web design. I'm also an author, and I am part of the Global Teacher Prize finalists.
Would you like to stand up to the podium?
I'm not sure I need to stand up. I speak pretty loudly. So if I'm not clear, let me know, and I'll speak even more loudly. But I think you can put on the slides. Where are those going to be shown? We can't actually see them so well. Oh, okay. So let me take this over. I want to start by saying that what we heard today, what we heard this morning, dwarfs, in my mind, any conversation that we can have about other aspects of education. And I had prepared my slides before I heard the two very brave young women we heard in the plenary session. And I couldn't change the slides, but I am going to try and change a little bit what I say. Because for me, the role of technology is and has always been, since I began working in the field of computer science, a way of giving voice back to young people. And let's show the first slide. And I'm going to try to work that theme into slides that were not at all dedicated to that cause. So we'll see how well I do. First of all, I was really surprised. I had to go look up white elephant because I thought, isn't that the place where you give gifts to people that someone has already given you? So am I supposed to take the gift of technology and give it to the audience? Oh, no, that's not what it means. It turns out to mean something you don't want. It turns out to mean something that's useless, troublesome, expensive to maintain, and difficult to dispose of. And for me, this is fascinating because this is my second year at GESF. And the response to technology in each case has been along these lines. It's troublesome, it's dangerous, it's going to take over from teachers, it's going to take over from students. And for me, it really is quite the opposite. I bring developmental psychology, I bring linguistics, I bring care for young people and the developmental milestones they're trying to reach into the development of technology. as a way of ensuring that they are not treated like, and you can go to the second slide, useless things. And perhaps this is the kind of white elephant technology that's expensive to maintain and difficult to get rid of, and that still exists in so many classrooms. But this is not what I'm talking about. If you show the third slide, you'll see a model of technology that I think is a white elephant and that we are having a hard time getting rid of. It's a model of technology where we seat children one by one in front of computers, one by one, 1 to 1. And if you'll go to the next slide, you'll see why I think this is so problematic, although so frequent in our classrooms. Because it presumes that if a computer can be stuck in front of a child and give that child an education, then that child must be some kind of empty vessel into which that ever powerful, ever present, and so full of knowledge computer can just pour its knowledge into the child. But anybody who attends the Global Economic Skills Forum knows that that's not how education proceeds. We cannot replace children's voices with the voices of computers. If you go to the next slide, you'll see why. Because children co-construct knowledge. The definition of learning is to replace a conception that you have with another conception. And that only happens when those two conceptions confront one another. And that's why knowledge has to be co-constructed in dialogue, in a dialogic form, among students and between students and teachers. And so if you think of the model of computers pouring knowledge into children, that is certainly a way of getting rid of children's voices, of shutting them down. And the two young women who spoke to us this morning showed tremendous bravery by not being shut down, by using their voices, which had been taken away from them. Because, of course, Boko Haram is trying to take girls' voices away from them. So how do we use technology to raise children's voices up? This is the question that I've spent my career trying to deal with. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see Herb Simon, who was a psychologist, Nobel laureate, probably the only person to win both the Nobel Prize and the Turing Award for the best computer science work in the world. And Carnegie Mellon is a special place because our computer science department was built by a pair of researchers who spent their entire careers working together, one a psychologist and the other a mathematician. And together they built a vision of computer science that was not just, as they said, about the boxes, but about everything around those boxes, including and especially the person sitting in front of them. And what Herb Simon said was that improvement in education is going to require converting teaching from a solo sport to a community-based research activity. It's why we're all sitting here. It's why we're not sitting at home in front of our screens watching this on a screen. We are engaging in that community-based research activity. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see how we bring these things together. How do we engage in research on teaching and learning as a community sport, as a community activity? And how do we use the outcome of that activity to give young people back their voices in such a way that they can learn through that dialogic activity of arguing with people their same age and confronting misbeliefs with true beliefs, with two different conceptions of the world where we don't know yet which one is true, because after all, that is the definition of science, is something that we believe or believed at one point and that can be proven untrue. So the technologies that you're going to see in the future zone were chosen very carefully. There are a lot of glitzy technologies in the world, and a lot of glitzy people who would be happy to sell you those technologies for your classroom. But the 7 technologies that I chose have 2 characteristics, and they live at the intersection of those 2. One is they are glitzy technologies. They are really cool. You're going to see augmented reality, where scanning an atom turns it into an entity on a screen. You're going to see virtual reality. You're going to see a virtual child. That's my own work. You're going to see a robot not taking over from a teacher, but asking a child to become a teacher of that robot. And every one of these technologies, as well as being exciting and novel and world-shaking, is also based on the newest and most important theories of pedagogy, because that's what's lacking in most glitzy technologies, is basing them on what we know, how people learn. So the people in that room study first how students interact with one another and with teachers, use the results of that study to make models of how people learn and how they learn best, use those models to implement new learning technologies, and then assess those technologies, at which point, being human, I'll speak for myself, maybe the others aren't, I always find out where I fail, where I failed, where my technologies don't work, and so I go back to the data and collect more data. But in every case, once again, the advent of these technologies in the classroom must not mean the death of social interaction, the death of voice. It must not quiet those children, especially those girls in the classroom. And it must not still cultural differences, cultural specificities, what it means to be a member of a community, what it means to have an identity. Because the best learning, if you go on, I probably haven't, I haven't been keeping up. I've forgotten to say, oh, I can do that. Look, it's a technology. So exciting. Who knew? Wonder what I pointed at. This is always, you know, same problem I have with glass doors. You never know what to wave your hands at to get the door to open. Where do I point? You don't have to point, just click. Okay. What are you guys seeing? Good. Okay. So this is the part where I talked about the advent of technology in the classroom not meaning the death of social interaction or the loss of cultural differences and cultural specificity. This is technology that my students and I built for children with Asperger's or high-functioning autism. It allows children to practice social interaction with virtual children, not because we want children with Asperger's to spend the rest of their lives simply communicating with virtual children, but because our results have shown that when they practice with virtual children, they do better later on with their real peers. Now, let's try this. There. Because the best learning takes context into account. Cultural context, emotional context, socio-emotional context. The best learning takes place in a context. The best technology-enhanced learning starts with understanding learners. And this is one of my favorite sets of photos. It was taken by my colleague Amy Ogun, Dr. Amy Ogun, whose work you're going to see in the Future Zone. She did some research in Latin America showing that technologies that they imported from North America that are meant for the one child, one computer model don't work in Latin America, where children very rightly know how to collaborate. And so what you'll notice is that although each child has been given a screen, they're all working on each other's screens. And so it doesn't work. You can't assess them. You don't know whose work is whom. And what Amy asks is, if the 21st century job skills include the ability to collaborate, why would we ask education to teach them how to work alone? So the best studies of learning take place in a context, and the best technologies take context into account. So, to finish, I would say the best technology-enhanced learning starts with scientific studies on learning, translates it into TEL, technology-enhanced learning solutions, at the individual level, the school level, the national level, cultural level, and the global level. The best TEL assesses the impact of those technologies not just on learning gains, but also socio-emotional skills and the ability to raise one's voice, to feel autonomy, to feel self-esteem, to feel agency, the ability to change the world. And when it doesn't work, the best researchers in TEL, the best developers, go back to the drawing board and they do that same thing. And as the old Breck commercial said, and then they rinse and repeat. They go back over and over again. So I'm going to stop there, and I hope that what I've convinced you of is that you should go see the Future Zone technologies, 7 very special technologies, and that you too, when you adopt technologies for the classroom, when you assess technologies, when you think about the role of technology, you will think not of technology as an expert that pours knowledge into children, but as technology as a tool that can help children to use their voices with other children to learn, and then later when they're adults to change the world. Thank you.
We'll have loads of questions afterwards. I would like to introduce our next speaker. And over to you, Suleiman.
Can you please load the presentation? So I have about 7 minutes to address 3 key issues. One is how technology is affecting and impacting the delivery of education in universities. What are the key changes that we're expecting in the next few years? And finally, the biggest obstacles to fully leveraging technology to improve teaching and learning. So, yeah, that's what I'm clicking. It's not moving. Oh, it's moving. It's, sorry. So it has been about 6 years that the first massive open online course was launched, and everybody predicted the demise of universities. I'm happy to report that the universities are here to stay. And our children and grandchildren will still go to universities. So the MOOC revolution has become a MOOC evolution. However, what has been disrupted in a massive way is how our students approach technology, approach knowledge, and learn. So if you look at this chart, just between 2012 and 2014, the percentage of students who are accessing course knowledge through smartphones and tablets has increased dramatically. And so as educators, we cannot ignore this fact, and we have to adapt to the way our students are interacting with technology and how that technology is disrupting how they learn. And a lot of it is disruption and distraction. So what I mean by distraction is you can come as a teacher and try to teach a course, and students take notes with their laptops, but instead of actually paying attention to you, they are on social media, on Facebook. So you have to deal with that. Students have a very short attention span, as we all know now. If your video is longer than 7 minutes, forget it. In a couple of years, it will be 3 minutes. And that actually becomes a more and more challenging exercise for teachers to actually retain the attention of students. What we are seeing also is that faculty are making the mistake of using technology for coolness effects. The same way, I don't know if most of us are old enough to remember that when people started first to use PowerPoint, they would all come with presentations that have all these flashy animations. And the animations are just animations for the sake of animation, not animation for the sake of improving understanding or insights. And we are seeing a lot of that with technology in the classroom, that audience response systems, or ARS, are being used because they are cool and not necessarily because they are enhancing teaching. Another issue is that today, if you're teaching a class on all sorts of disciplines, there is a bank of questions and answers to all possible problems and exams that you may actually think of. And so there are also issues that you have to deal with regards to academic honesty. This is actually putting a lot of pressure on universities. And fortunately for universities, they cannot hide any more bad teachers, particularly for introductory courses, where, you know, if you're teaching introductory computer science course, and there are 10 MOOCs on Coursera and edX that are very well done, your poor teacher is actually not going to do well with students because they will compare that teacher with the courses they can get online. Also, when students go through a hybrid course or flipped course and they have a good experience, that puts a lot of pressure on all the instructors who are not using technology. So there is something good that comes out of this, and that is that passive learning is really disappearing. Classes are being flipped. A very large number of faculty are taking everything that you do passively, put it in a video, and that really was what is replacing readings. And to some extent, those videos, the same way as MOOCs, are not a replacement for a course, but they are more a replacement of a textbook. So students don't read anymore textbooks, assigned readings before class. They watch videos of you teaching the material that is fairly passive and take quizzes before coming to class. But there are lots of opportunities to use this technology for just-in-time teaching, and there is a lot that comes from modularizing courses and thinking of concepts that you want to teach in a thoughtful way, thinking about learning outcomes. I'm not going to dwell a lot on the next big changes in EdTech, and I will reiterate what Justine said. Please go to the Future Zone and see some of these technologies. So these technologies range from AI machine learning, virtual reality and simulation, gamification, and then active and personalized learning. A lot of us in this area of teaching and learning are watching these technologies very carefully and experimenting with different platforms, startups in this space, in a variety of disciplines and schools. So for example, at Columbia, our dental school and our medical school are using a lot VR, and we'll see where that goes. So there is a lot of experimentation that is going on, and none of these technologies has really yet reached a tipping point where we were like, okay, this is going to be very disruptive and this is actually going to be very pervasive. We are not there yet, but we may be just a very, very few years from that. Now, what are some of the biggest challenges in leveraging technology? One has to really understand, as I mentioned a bit earlier, and Justine also alluded to it, is that technology is a tool, the same way as a chalk is a tool. And so it's a tool towards a goal, towards a mean of enhancing learning. And to be able to use technology effectively, key to this is our ability to solicit feedback and to assess and evaluate what we do when we use technology and in what ways it is actually enhancing teaching and learning. And when we are doing that, we have to do it in a way where we actually are ready to fail. So with a lot of this experimentation that is going on campuses around the world, key to that experimentation is the belief that it's fine to fail, because it's actually very important to distill a set of best practices and pitfalls of what works, what doesn't work, and be able to learn from successes and failures. Another issue that we confront in universities, and very much this type of device exists also in the corporate world, is we are actually very siloed within universities between pedagogy and technology. And here I'm not talking about faculty and IT. I'm talking about administrative staff who are actually working on technology and administrative staff who are working on pedagogy. And what a lot of universities have done over the past few years is actually to find a way of integrating that technology and pedagogy by reorganizing, restructuring their various groups at the university level, at the school level, and finding the right formula where you actually bring the two together to achieve higher results. Another key element is to bring the faculty to the game. And for that, one has to create incentives. And so lots of grants to incite faculty to innovate with technology, flip their courses, offer MOOCs. As I mentioned, trying to learn from these experiments. And finally, fostering a culture that both rewards and values teaching. And then finally, I will close by saying that key to what we are doing as research universities is coming to realize that research and teaching and learning have to come together and actually become one. And so that we are really institutions of research, teaching and learning. Thank you.
Thank you very much. It resonates very loudly with the challenges that we are experiencing at the IOE. So on that note, moving to Google. And Rania, please.
So actually, I won't be using slides. Hopefully you can hear me okay. Yeah? Okay, good. So at Google, we really believe that education is about creating the future. That's a really broad statement, I know, but technology is playing an increasingly important role in the workplace and in the society that our children are growing up in. And we need to really help them thrive in that environment. And that's really kind of the angle that Google has been taking when looking at how we can impact the education space. So whether it's about access, whether it's about sharing information or enablement, technology is a critical driver in how we're looking at what we can do to support, to support the process of teaching and learning. So technology is already enabling us to do very powerful things. And that's really amplified when we have the ability to share information instantly. So if you look throughout history, when humans have come up with a way to share information kind of on an instant basis, it's really profoundly affected the societies that we've lived in, whether it's the printing press or telephones, et cetera. And that technology really extends to the world of sharing information. And that's kind of at the core of what Google's mission is, to make the world's information universally accessible and useful. And it's kind of the foundation as well on which Google for Education was established. So when looking at what we do in education, our product managers, our engineers, we're looking at questions that they really wanted to kind of get the answers to and solve. So things like, how do we help students and teachers easily have access to and to share information? How do we streamline and simplify the classroom kind of pain points? What barriers really exist right now within the classroom, and how would we be able to help both teachers and students overcome those barriers? And I think an extension of that is really along the lines of how do we actually use kind of the technology that we have to help instill and help students develop the skills that they will need for jobs of tomorrow. Because obviously technology is, it's naturally changing the world around us, and it's really changing the world of work as well. It's no longer a separate industry on its own, but really kind of the driver behind all different types of business. So given that students are really surrounded and almost bombarded by technology, how do we kind of come up with a way to have an education tool that's really focused on education? So at Google, we commissioned the Economist Intelligence Unit to do research on the skills needed to thrive within the future workplace. And their research, by surveying Fortune 500 senior leadership, kind of confirms the importance of 21st century skills, right? So collaboration, creativity, and problem solving, and critical thinking. And at Google, we really want to help instill kind of those skills through the products that we have and through the programs that we developed to help familiarize students with technology. So ultimately, our vision is really to bring the best of Google into the classroom. in a budget-friendly way, in a way that's relevant for teachers and students. So we have a number of different kind of product areas that focus on education. We have our G Suite for Education platform, which is kind of an online, it's a web-based productivity set of tools that are available for any education institution to use for free. And it really allows students and teachers to interact anywhere at any time because it's web-based. It's actually what we use at Google as well. And beyond that, we've also created an operating system known as Chrome OS, which works on our Chromebook devices. And what's unique about this is that our engineers really took a lot of time and studied kind of what are the pain points that exist right now within the classroom. So they weren't looking at it from the angle necessarily of how are we going to completely transform education, but what pain points can we address right now that will make the process of kind of teaching more front and center and less of the teching. So just having technology that really works within the classroom. So they've developed this Chromebook device that's meant to be kind of easy to set up, shareable, kind of just really works within a classroom setting. So you combine that, you combine the Chromebook device with the platform, G Suite for Education, you really have a robust tool that's relatively affordable for schools to use, and that allows students to have interactive information, or to be able to interact with their teachers kind of really at any point in time. We also announced Expeditions, which is kind of another immersive technology where students are able to take kind of virtual reality experience using kind of a cardboard headset and have virtual field trips all over the world. At Google, though, it really isn't just about the technology, so we look at programs to provide and kind of support and stimulate learning. So we have projects that run for teachers specifically and kind of helping them become familiar with the technology so that it really is a tool and it's not focused on, it's not kind of the front and center, right? It's a tool that they can use to kind of simplify what they do within the classroom, make the process of communication with their students much more easy and kind of streamlined. So we have this teacher training program. We have a global program where teachers can interact with one another from around the world. And the idea is to really share best practices and to help them kind of develop a sense of community around this kind of transformation that's happening within education. We also run an extensive number of computer science programs, both locally and globally. And the idea behind this, again, is going back to kind of building the skills that students need for the jobs of tomorrow. So whether it's, by nature of learning computer science, that discipline really lends itself well to learning or to kind of building on problem-solving skills. So it's something that we really focus on globally at Google. And finally, kind of just the research and our commitment to the academic community. We have research grants and programs that are designed to kind of enable university professors not only to teach fundamentals of computer science to high school teachers, but really kind of just develop and ensure that there are advancements in that field. So ultimately, Google is quite committed to education, both on the product and kind of the program side of things. For me personally, I'm proud to be part of that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And finally, one of our Global Teachers finalists. So please, Koen, up to you.
My presentation, please. Well, never mind. I believe that formal education tends to be limited or restricted very often to assessment, memorizing, knowledge-based learning within classrooms, and there's very limited interaction between students from different classrooms. And I'd like to focus on one approach and a few tools which bring change in my classroom. And I'd like to highlight the fact that I want to rely on research before implementing a new and preferably free tool. So, first of all, you don't reveal the ending to a movie, so why giving away all knowledge to your students? We, teachers, are still too used to instruct our students for most of the time, while there are other approaches like makerspaces and flipped learning and collaborative learning. And I believe collaboration is key. And I did research about collaborative learning in the UK a few years ago. And to be very brief, I discovered that knowledge created in a group is more than what can be achieved alone. And so there are two approaches. And the first one is social constructivism. And in this constructivist approach, students learn by interacting in a small group, and the teacher becomes a discussion leader. And in a connectivist approach, students are learning by building a personal learning network of several nodes, as they call them, which can be peers, books, websites, social media, etc. And it's the teacher's duty, a teacher becomes a co-traveler, to point the students in the right direction, and as well making sure that the students check the reliability of their sources. So he already mentioned the MOOCs, but MOOCs are based on connectivism. Yeah. So enough about the approach. Okay. I'm on a distance learning project, which implies that my students attend half of the class at home and half at school. So we have the best of both worlds. And I'm using a web conferencing tool while I'm teaching in my own kitchen. On the top of here, that's my kitchen. And you can compare a web conferencing tool with Skype and using the microphone and the webcam. We can all hear and see each other, and I can share my screen. And some of the benefits can be predicted. Like, for instance, no more traffic jam. Yeah. I teach in my own familiar environment, so I can mow my lawn during breaks, and I can do some cooking. And this is not marketing, this is actually happening in my kitchen while I teach. But there's one interesting side effect, which became a really interesting benefit as well. And that is that I soon discovered, I asked my students to put their questions in the chat function instead of using the microphone, which can be quite disturbing. And I soon discovered that my students began to ask questions in the chat, and they began to solve each other's questions. They really love to do this, and especially the shy students. And I was a shy student myself, but they are more involved during remote sessions than in a face-to-face environment. There's also a downside, because no internet means no class at home. Yeah? And what about those students who don't have a device or nor internet, or how do we even know they are attending class at home? Well, we found two solutions. The students can borrow a free device from school, or they can attend class at school in one room which is dedicated to the project. And we also set up random polls which they have to answer within 1 minute, otherwise they are regarded absent. Okay? Yeah, forgot, yeah, okay. Okay. So I strive for a paperless classroom, and I spend a considerable amount of time while creating courseware, at least 1 month a year. And you can imagine that I really don't like students complaining about certain topics missing in my courseware, in my textbooks. And so I decided to create digital textbooks while I teach. And I use OneNote as a tool, but you can use several tools. And I can share one document with my students, and I can insert text, images, all kinds of multimedia. I can record audio, video, even handwriting, etc. And the students began to correct my typos as well, which is one benefit. But then I noticed that some students were taking pictures of my chalkboard. So I decided to replace my blackboard by OneNote as well. And I was able to draw using the digital pen. I can zoom and reuse certain parts in other classrooms and other school years. And then I wanted to do more. I allowed my students to create their own page in my textbook, and they spontaneously began to share own written tutorials and quick start guides. And this drove us in a very interesting new situation in which my students began to learn from each other, and I even began to learn from my students. And I have to admit, and this is no marketing, this is really genuine, some of my students begin to know more about web design than I do, because they're not restricted to my knowledge anymore. And that's really true. That's really true. So there's also a downside, of course. So yeah, this approach requires at least one device in the classrooms, and it requires also some skills, ICT skills, to the teacher and the students as well. To be very, very brief, time's limited, I create instructional videos, and my students can choose during some classes what they want to learn. And some of them prefer to rehearse, and others want to gain a maximum amount of knowledge. So last, I had a very emotional Skype call 2 years ago with Moses. And Moses is an outreach assistant in the Kakuma refugee camp. And this camp is based in Kenya, and it houses 200,000 refugees who fled from war and hunger in several countries like Somalia, Burundi, Congo, etc. And I promised to help him to increase the level of education in the camp by having regular Skype lessons with them. And during my first Skype lesson, I saw that I was kind of naive, thinking that having a Skype call was going to be like having a Skype call with Carla, or my family, or my friends. And because resources are very limited in the camp, the schools have no power supply, there's a textbook ratio of 1 to 10 students, and well, I decided to send my own laptop to the camp, and I started up a crowdfunding campaign which allowed us to send some additional laptops. And I was also able to find and connect 100 global teachers from 40 different countries willing to participate. And right now, people are having Skype calls with them on daily basis from 40 different countries. So we are not only offering knowledge, we are also bringing empathy into the classrooms. And not only the students from Kakuma benefit from this situation, but also the students from the other students from the other countries get the right perspective into the concept of being a refugee. And they talk about hobbies and religion and culture and many other things like habits. And yeah, when you consider that the students are locked into the camp, we are basically unlocking their world by having a Skype call with them. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Koen. You've obviously got a very inspirational kitchen. Just a couple of things that really struck me was a few words in terms of, well, one that really struck me was, my students aren't restricted to my knowledge as a teacher anymore. Very powerful statement. Your statement about context, really, really powerful. Disruption, destruction, social media for the students versus, the models of instruction that we were used to in the past, and new pedagogies versus, technology as a tool. So these are kind of key messages that really kind of struck me from what our speakers were talking about, highlighting, the kind of capacity of technology if we really use it well. So on that note, I'm sure there must be lots of questions or observations that people have got that they want to share with us, and we'd love to hear from you. Yep, go ahead.
First of all, I'd like to thank the panel for this interesting session, and my question actually is to Google Education. Well, as you mentioned, so technology is a great tool to access information, while one of the key objectives of education is to embed knowledge. and to ensure that students can transfer that knowledge into real practices, or to ensure that they can, what they can do with their knowledge in real life situations and solving problems. So how can you bridge the gap between information and knowledge? It's a controversial issue, particularly when it comes to Google education.
So I think, can you hear me? From the Google perspective, when we look at technology, it's really, again, not meant to replace anything that's happening within the classroom, particularly with the teacher and student interaction. So I think one of the things that you're describing, and that ability to have that impact on students is really something that is owned by the teacher and is owned by that kind of environment that they're in. The technology that we bring is ultimately meant to kind of simplify and actually reduce the focus on the tech part, so that there is more of the teaching happening within the classroom. So the way that it's designed, the way that it's kind of built is really to solve all of the kind of the general pain points that you get, right? Anything from just having the devices not booting, to kind of having long-lasting battery life, to actually having the ability to control what happens on the devices. So ultimately, when we're looking at it, it's really a more of, okay, how can we put this piece of technology in the classroom so that there is more teaching that happens and less focus on what's happening with the technology itself.
Yes, please. Can we have a microphone, please?
It's okay.
Oh, okay, right, okay, fine.
Well, first of all, thank you for all of the speakers. Really great presentations and very inspiring. I just got a question for Ms. Cassell and Mr. Sulaiman Kachani. You were talking about technology and in regards to that coming into the classroom and the students and everything. But what about how can we use technology to create more of character or value-based students rather than just skills and giving them the necessary skills for jobs, but really creating specific characteristics that are necessary in the workplace or as a human being, basically, for progress of humanity?
So I curated the Future Zone with 7 technologies that represent different ends of the technology spectrum and different ends of the learning spectrum. The work that you're going to see from my graduate student, Samantha, and I, deals with SEL, socio-emotional learning. And that's the topic that I've addressed for the last 5 or 8 years or so. I have a new project working on curiosity and how we inspire, scaffold, and sustain, preserve even curiosity in a teach-to-the-test environment. And that's one way of looking at the role that technology can play when government funding is tied to skills, but we want to teach children how to learn, not a particular set of skills. Another topic that I've been looking at is rapport, that is interpersonal relationship strength. We know that for the most under-resourced schools, the single variable that most accounts for learning gains in that school is the child's sense that he or she is respected by the teacher. That counts for more variance in learning than any other variable. And children who feel rapport with the other students around them learn more than students who feel that they are separate or differentiated from the students around them. So we've been building technologies that mediate amongst children to create rapport, and technologies that actually create rapport with children, or relationship strength, interpersonal closeness, as an infrastructure to learning. Right now, I'm about to begin a project on empathy and using storytelling on empathy. So to my mind, there's no reason. I think what happened was the people who built the first technologies were geeks, kind of by definition. And in Silicon Valley today, very unfortunately, there's been an explicit return to build for people like yourself. So in startups, I was told very recently, the people who join startups are told to build for themselves, build what you yourself would like. But the people who build technology are not necessarily like the rest of the people in the world. And you think that's a joke. It's a very serious joke. So the program, the human-computer interaction program that I was the director of until a year or so ago, we teach all of our students a mantra. And if you say this to anybody who's graduated, they'll immediately repeat it. The user is not like me, the user is not like me, the user is not like me. And in fact, the first year of every student's program consists of understanding that the real people in the world are not like them. So if you keep that as a mantra in your head, you're probably less likely to build perhaps a STEM curriculum as the first thing that comes to mind, or teaching computer science as the first thing that comes to mind, and perhaps focusing on more basic skills like reading and writing or empathy. So I think we need to look for ways to allow the developers of technology to come from a broader base of people, and to work with a broader base of people, to do their research with students from all different contexts, all different socioeconomic strata, all different cultures. And I think that's going to ensure that the technologies that get built are just as effective at socio-emotional learning as they are at skill learning. Certainly my own research has demonstrated significant and concrete statistical gains in things like relationship strength and curiosity.
I'll just add two quick things to what Justine said, and I agree 100% with what she said. Even if you were not to believe that a computer can actually teach values to a human being or to a young student, I think there are two other things I would like to add. One is it's potentially easier to train the teachers to actually build that empathy and be able to teach that, and technology can play a role in that. And the other positive thing to look at is while we use technology currently to deliver STEM curriculum or other skills, skill-based teaching, it actually allows for time in the classroom for teachers to interact more meaningfully with students. So those are two things actually that could actually be additive to what Justine said.
Can I just make a quick comment? I'd like you all to take a look at a piece of technology called Classroom Insight that helps teachers learn to call on all children and to watch who's speaking and who's not speaking and who they're inadvertently leaving out, where the blank spaces are in their classroom. It's in booth number 1 in the Future Zone, and it's a very powerful piece of technology.
Great, thank you, Justine and Suleiman. I have to say, as the Institute of Education, we would completely agree with what you've just said. And my mantra to working with people in digital development and learning technologies has been exactly the same for about 30 years. So thank you. Yeah. Please, yes.
I have a question on gamification. I think this is one of the slides.
Yeah, I mentioned it.
So what role does gamification do with learning? It helps in motivation, definitely, but without any feedback or debriefing, doesn't it just lead to nothing? Not really learning, deep learning, could be very shallow.
I'm not sure there is evidence of one side or the other. I will just say that's a very controversial topic, and certainly most of my colleagues would not agree to transforming their classes into games. There are folks who believe that you should actually change all your descriptions of courses with quests instead of exams, and and even the language you use to describe your course, you can make it more of a game to motivate students so that they actually can learn more. There is no doubt that our students many of them play games, and so they are used to spending a number of hours playing games. But I think there is a lot of evidence yet to be found that transforming courses into, or enabling gamification of courses is actually going to enhance learning.
And as Suleiman no doubt knows, there is a shibboleth. There's a way to tell whether a game is going to help or not help learning. So I detest the word gamification, because to me it's like the spoonful of sugar that makes the medicine go down. To me it makes it sound like learning is so unpleasant that we have to sugarcoat it. And that's a terrible lesson to teach a child. So there is scientific research that shows that when a game depends on extrinsic motivation, that is, the fun of the game cloaks what is not fun about learning, then it won't help learning over the long term. But if the game embeds intrinsic learning, that is, the joy of learning for its own sake, or the joy of achieving a goal for its own sake, as opposed to get a badge that has nothing to do with the topic, then it's more likely to improve learning gains. So if you look for extrinsic versus intrinsic motivation, it's a good way to tell whether a game is going to help.
Actually, I would like to add something very quickly myself on this, because I was involved in an innovation project a few years ago, looking at exactly that, introducing virtual worlds and games for learners between the ages of 14 and 18. So in the UK, they were kind of getting ready for their GCSEs and their A-levels and all that. And we did a lot of talking to the learners, because there was a lot of discord in the team about this approach, because there was the pro camp and the against camp. So we decided to finally go and talk to our end users, which is not necessarily a bad idea. And it was a resounding, please do not do this to us. When we have to learn, we want to learn. When we want to play games, we'll go and play games. But don't mix up the two together, because they're very, very different things. And it was it was 100%. It wasn't even like, 75%. It was unanimous. Don't do this to us. We want to learn, and when we want to learn, we want to do it in a learning environment, not in a virtual world or a game environment. So that was quite a profound lesson. Yeah.
But there are two types of games: the serious games and the educational games.
Of course.
So you're
no,
talking
I'm not.
about, sorry, the entertainment games or the serious?
They didn't mind sort of getting like simulations or those kind of things that were really focused on what they had to learn. But what they didn't was like, don't make us play games to kind of tell us how to learn or what to learn, because that is something very different. And when we really want to play games, we go and play on our Xbox. It's far better anyway. So two more questions, and I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. So please, yeah, and then I'll come to you.
Everybody's basically talking about the new pedagogies and 21st century skills. And then you mentioned basically GCSEs, IBSEs. All of these, at the end of this, we're basically still doing the same type of assessments that were required of us, 10 years, 15 years. So how do the assessments need to change? Are there any tools that can actually provide the actual assessment that you have taught them the 21st century skills? I think this is where a lot of educators are asking that question in terms of technology, and some of the challenges in terms of people who are actually, providing, solutions in terms of technology.
So this is the place where artificial intelligence, I think, can have the most positive impact. I think we do best when we don't separate assessment from learning. And one of the things that AI can do is keep a running tally, so to speak, of how a student is doing, so that the actual learning is the assessment. And here I'm talking about things like cognitive tutors or adaptive educational technologies. So when technologies are adapted to children's learning states, when we maintain a focus on children's learning states, on progress rather than product, then the AI can follow along and use that as a rolling assessment so that we don't have to stop for tests. It's perhaps the most powerful impact of artificial intelligence and especially machine learning. So to make this more clear, because that probably sounds pretty abstract, you throw AI at it and you don't have to have tests anymore. And it's not quite that easy. But what machine learning will do, and a really great example is the work being done by Ken Cadinger, who's shown a 2 sigma rise in learning gains with an adaptive hands-on learning component in an online course. So really concretely, in 10 weeks, he's shown that you can learn twice as much if you have this adaptive learning component than if you don't in an existent online course. And the reason is that he's collected hundreds of thousands of instances of students learning in that same subject. He's crunched those data to look at what kinds of students learn best in what kinds of contexts, what kinds of students learn best with word problems, what kinds of students learn best with formulae. Is it better to use what's called productive failure to allow students to fail and then start again? Which kinds of students do best with productive failure? Which kinds of students do best with negative examples, examples of what doesn't work? So he has these hundreds and thousands of instances, and machine learning learns from those and then takes a new student and says, from this student's performance on day one, I can tell that this student needs to have educational content presented in the following way, and presents it in that way. And from the student's mistakes on day two, again on day three, readapts. And so every day the student is getting content adapted to her or his needs. And that adaptation is also an assessment of what the student knows and doesn't know, and where the student's gaps are. Yeah, so you can look at OLI, the Online Learning Initiative, that was built by Carnegie Mellon and is now located both at Carnegie Mellon and at Stanford University. It's free. It's really hard for the moment to build a course in it. I'm saying this honestly as someone who's tried, not as one of the developers. But right now we've just received funding, and I shouldn't say we because I have no role in this, but the people who work on this have received funding to facilitate the on-ramp for teachers to build their own course in OLI. So OLI has existed for a long time. It's always shown learning gains. Now it's going to become easier and easier for teachers to build a course in OLI that has this adaptive, hands-on assessment built into learning component.
Just one thing I would like to add is that there are a lot of adaptive technologies out there. Don't be fooled, because they probably aren't, because they're not being informed by the learning science. And that is the big difference. A lot of the technologies claim that they do this. They really, really don't. And it's really dangerous to start engaging with some of these technologies that aren't injected by the learning science and relying on them. So that's just my word of caution. And again,
it's like Intel Inside, you know, the old Intel Inside.
Yeah.
Look for learning science inside.
Yeah.
There should be evidence and science behind it, and whoever sells that technology, and when it's free, it's perhaps a better deal. It should have the science tied to the product. Yeah, and OLI is definitely a case of that.
One more question, please.
Thank you. My question is about the relation between the procurement process of tools and this idea of the mix of pedagogy and technology. Because I was thinking if this mix of pedagogy and technology, as you said, Mr. Kashani, that is a key, means that every teacher and every school project should choose the kind of technology, the kind of tools they need. Or if you can have national big programs with specific tools from specific companies from the industry, and if it could help this process of pedagogical adaptation or development of processes of learning.
Sure, I'll take a first stab at this. I mean, it's a very important question, and technology is evolving rapidly. The number of products and edtech startups is very, very large, and I think at the micro level, at the faculty level, the pervasive thought is that we should let 1,000 flowers bloom. So we should try every single technology and actually experiment with different type of products and see which ones work and then make a decision. Obviously, a centralized IT support function of a university will see this very differently and will probably not engage with every single company. And that creates friction. But I think for the past 10 years, what we have seen is actually a lot more freedom provided to departments and individual faculty to use different technologies. That has made it has become easier because learning management systems can plug and play with a number of various tools seamlessly. And we are, my colleague Sandesh and I are dealing with tens of those type of examples on a weekly basis of faculty trying to go rogue and using different types of technologies. And what we do is just encourage that.
So I could just add in from the Google perspective. I think like the platform that we've created is intended to be kind of a baseline on top of which other kind of applications or other programs can really fit in well. So with the kind of the openness of the Google platform, you have the ability to access the tools that Google has provided, but then there's also a wealth of the wealth of applications and other programs that third-party developers have created. And what we found in schools that have adopted Google for Education is that every teacher will find what works best for them within the classroom. But the fundamental kind of underlying architecture is there, and then they can sort of pick and choose because there isn't really one size that fits all.
Okay, I'm afraid we're going to have to wrap up. But if, I'll be here to answer more questions, and do feel free to approach us as the conference proceeds. And on this really white elephant question, or ambiguous white elephant question, I think it's time to go for lunch. So, or go to our next session. So thank you so much for joining us, and thank you all for being such a patient audience.